Welcome back to Beyond Four Walls, Conversations on Affordable Housing. I'm David Dworkin, President and CEO of the National Housing Conference, the nation's oldest and broadest affordable housing coalition. We're joined today by the Honorable Adrianne Todman, who is the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's senior official performing the duties of the Secretary, and has served as the agency's Deputy Secretary since her confirmation by the Senate in June of 2021. She was named HUD Acting Secretary in March of 2024. Adrianne Todman may be the most qualified leader of HUD in its history. With her deep experience in a wide range of areas, she's proven to be an invaluable asset and a highly effective leader of the department during her tenure. Her commitment to listening to all sides has distinguished her career and leadership at HUD. She cares deeply about the people impacted by HUD's programs and puts their needs front and center in shaping the future of U.S. housing policy. Prior to joining HUD, she served as the CEO of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, following a successful tenure leading the District of Columbia Housing Authority, which, if you know a little bit about the history of the DCHA, you know that means a lot. Thanks for joining us. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
It's great to be here, David. Thank you for the invitation.
So, I'd like to give our listeners a little sense of who our guests are.
Sure.
And so let me just start by asking my favorite question, which is, tell us something about yourself that has nothing to do with your job.
Oh, wow. So I love to cook. Cooking is my therapy, and I'm a rather good cook too. My lasagna.
If you do say yourself.
If I do say my lasagna, my mac and cheese, my grilled fish. I throw a little bit of my West Indian stuff in there. Mm-hmm. I love to cook, and it's therapy for me. So that's probably something most people do not know about me.
That's great. And actually, my wife and I both love to cook.
Oh, there you go.
And
we should have a little
she
cook-off.
was a real chef.
Oh.
So, and when we started dating, she actually said to me, when I told her that I was learning how to cook, I didn't know she had been a real chef.
Right.
She said, well, real chefs learn to bake first because it's harder. And
to her point, I don't bake. It is, I'm a get the Betty Crocker and put some almond extract in it.
It's chemistry.
Yes, it is. It is.
And no, we won't talk about how I did in chemistry in high school.
We won't.
So let's talk about housing and community development. You have an extensive background here. You're very passionate about this. How did you come to housing? Everybody's got a story about how they ended up in housing.
Yes. Mine was a complete serendipity. I moved to Washington, D.C. right out of college. Mm-hmm. I worked on the Hill and had a great time there, saw how the Hill worked, or used to work. I then had an opportunity to have my first job at HUD, but how I came upon that first job is the interesting story. It was 1996, a little while ago. My boss then on the Hill had just retired.
And who was that?
Ron DeLugo, who was the congressman from the Virgin Islands, which of course is I consider home in so many ways. And so, I figured, Democratic staffer, we're going to get Democratic council, committee's job. It's going to be great. And then, that was the year that Republicans took control after 30 years at the House of Representatives. So my options on the Hill became reduced. And so I began to apply in the executive branch, and I got a job offer at OMB. That was my first job offer at OMB. And I said, I'm going to OMB. I'm going to become an OMB staffer. 2 weeks later, HUD sent a job offer offering several $1,000s more in pay. Oh. And that began my long journey in housing. It was like pretty retail then. But when I look back at that moment, I always say to particularly younger folks, sometimes your path finds you. That was meant to happen. And ever since that moment, I could not get housing and the concept of the built environment and its impact on people out of my stream. So I've been doing it ever since.
And I find that all the time with housers, as we call ourselves, is you stumble into this and then you fall in love with it and you're hooked.
And I think love is the right word.
Yeah.
It has been a passion for me all these many decades.
Yeah. And it's so tangible and it has such a big impact in people's lives.
And you can see the fruits of your labor. You know, and as frustrating as you mentioned my different jobs along the way here, as frustrating as some of those jobs have been, at the end of the day, I go home and I felt I did something today that helps people. And it's just affirming. It's just when I used to run the housing authority and I would have probably my most difficult days, I would literally get in a car and go to a public housing site and walk around and talk to people to remind me why I'm doing it to begin with. And so now I get to do that by traveling the country. That's been great to do.
I love that because the work is so important and it can be incredibly frustrating. And when you talk about running a housing authority, I mean, that is literally where the tip of the housing shovel hits the ground. That is the front lines.
It is the front line. And we, housing authorities across the country, I've had the opportunity to meet so many housing authority directors who are doing phenomenal jobs, not just in public housing. They're building new homes. They're creating homeownership for first-time homeowners. They're helping during moments of financial stress for people. They're partnering with their local mayors and county executives on community development. So their breadth has grown over the past decades as well.
The ultimate HUD consumer.
Yes, indeed.
So when we think about housing and community development, and how it's evolved over the course of your career, what do you think are the key factors that have driven that change? Because it's very different. NHC actually created public housing. We advocated for the very first federal dollars for housing, the first public housing development, and wrote the 49 Act and the 68 Act. And so we have this deep history there, and it's changed so much. It changed again in the 70s. And then obviously during the Reagan administration, there was a big retrenchment. And with the Clinton administration, a very different approach. You were a part of that. Tell me about since then. Since you started in the Clinton administration, how have we seen that change and how much of it has been difficult and how much of it has been productive?
One of the things that we can learn from the past is we have to come up with big, bold ideas when moments call for it. So when you think about programs like HOME, when you think about even the Section 8 program, when you think about CDBG, when you think about these programs that we now just take for granted, to some of us, not all of us, it's a message from the past that do no small things. And I think we're at that point again right now. We're at the crossroads where we have to do big, bold things. And there were opportunities in the recent past to do some of those big, bold things in terms of housing investments. We didn't get that kind of support from the Hill. This administration fights every single year to get the funding we need. But if there's anything that those moments have taught us over the decades is that when there is a crisis like we are experiencing right now, we have to come together. The leaders have to come together, put politics aside, and do the right thing for the American people, just like they did when they created LIHTC, just like they did when they created CDBG. The time is now.
Yeah, and those were really game changers.
Absolutely. And we're still borrowing against the lessons of those programs right now and how to get things done. I mean, one of the things that, I love about, and mayors love and governors love about the CDBG program is just how flexible it allows them to be, to do things all the way from housing to childcare centers to libraries, things that communities need. When you think about some of the legislation on the Hill now to enhance LIHTC and to do work to build starter homes, these are things that we need to get across the line. And people expect us to do that.
So let's talk a little bit about CDBG. And for those who don't know about it, what's the program and how does this flexibility really enable communities to tailor housing and community development strategies to meet those local needs?
So the Community Development Block Grant is a gem of a program, and it provides local leaders and state leaders to really craft their vision and execution against things that people need in the moment. Some of the boldest CDBG efforts I've seen have been tied to economic development. So when people think about HUD, most people don't think that we're in the economic development game. They think, well, you're in the housing game or the public housing game. But I've always told the team, that the wonderful 9,000 employees here at HUD, we are absolutely in every neighborhood that most people just don't realize it. And I say that when I travel the country as well. So CDBG has celebrated its 50th anniversary this year among the suite of other housing programs we have. We provide funding to over 1,000 localities across the country, all the states so they can actually execute in a way that makes sense. And one of the things about CDBG that is so encouraging is the bipartisan support that it receives every single year on the Hill. And I think it's because of how it responds to the needs of so many different constituents across the country.
I think that's the piece about housing where there's a lot of hope in dealing with this housing crisis. Is it's one of the areas that remains largely bipartisan. There are some deep differences on execution, but when you look at CDBG, you look at Housing Choice Vouchers, and in particular, you look at the low-income housing tax credit, the House of Representatives, which is certainly as partisan as it's ever been in my professional lifetime, is passed a LIHTC expansion bill just recently, and I'm very optimistic that when we get to a big tax bill, we're going to see a significant increase in LIHTC.
I am too.
The bill has as many Republican co-sponsors as Democrats, and all in, it's about half the Congress.
It has to happen.
It
David.
Absolutely has to happen.
It absolutely has to happen. And I think that particularly for those of you who've been fighting for this to get across the line, it absolutely has to happen.
Let's move on to Section 8 and the Housing Choice Voucher program. We hear a lot from users of the program. They face challenges. In the case of tenants, having landlords who will take vouchers is an issue. Having enough vouchers is a big issue. And then for landlords, very challenging cost and delays resulting from the regulations and some of the inspection standards. And for them, the prospect of in a healthy market, having a unit empty for 2 or 3 months is a game changer. And so we've really got to think about how we shape that program so it's more effective. And what are you thinking about that? And, your experience, as we've talked about, is as a consumer of this program, you understand as well as anybody the challenges as well as the opportunities.
One thing to say, it's been a game changer in providing rental assistance to people who need that help. It now helps over 2 million families pay their rent every single day. But we do need to do a better job executing on the program. I meet with landlords at the local level and at the national level all the time. And they share with me that while they do want to be a part of that mission of helping people get access to affordable housing, they also recognize some of the business challenges that the program poses. You mentioned some of them, inspections and recertification. There is a vision that I have for the voucher program that really treats it as what it should be, which is a transfer of money from HUD to a housing authority to a landlord, and streamlines it in a way that you would be foolish as a landlord to not want to participate. Some of those changes will require our friends in Congress to help legislate on it, but there are things that we can do at HUD to make the program stronger. And we've done some of those things. We have made the value of a voucher closer to market rate so that tenants have a fighting chance applying for and getting that apartment. We've tried to provide opportunities for landlord incentives so they can participate as well, helping with, security deposits, helping with escrow funds in case there's some rehab that needs to happen on the back end of a tenancy. So we're doing things within our control. But I know, and I think many other people who are stakeholders in this program know, we have to do it in a much smarter way. And I'm dedicated to that. And I know that a lot of people who care about this program is dedicated to that as well. But here's the thing. We also need the funding. I'm going to go back to funding to make sure it works. At the end of the
day, it's all about funding.
To make sure it works. And the voucher program is a big, expensive program. It's a fair amount of HUD's own budget. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because when you're dealing with housing, one of the most fundamental things that really keep a family afloat and keep them in a position to thrive, I think that's priceless. I don't think the Appropriations Committee thinks that's priceless, but I think it's priceless. And we just need to understand the importance of a program like that to not just housing, but quite frankly, to the country's economy.
Well, they probably think it's pricey as opposed to priceless.
That's right.
But
that's right.
That's how you get things done.
That's how you get it done.
And the question is, are we going to invest in housing affordability and affordable housing or not?
Right.
Because if we don't, I always say housing is continuum. If you have fewer homeowners, you have more renters. And if you aren't building more housing, you're going to end up with higher rents.
That's right.
And that's going to result in more homelessness.
Well, we need all the right tools for the job. And as we are building all the homes we need to build, we do need programs on the demand side, like the voucher program, just to help people supplement their rents. One example of that, this story never gets told, but this administration provided $50 billion to the Treasury Department, $50 billion in rental assistance to help people pay their rents. And one of the reasons we did not get back then, 2021, 2022, droves of people having to leave their apartments and their homes is because we did that work. And that's never really a headline. Good news doesn't usually make for profitable news. It does not. But that is the value of something like that. I mean, we may not be able to ultimately build our way out of this crisis with the amount of units we need, with the time that we have to do it. So providing rental assistance in a way that is streamlined and smart and really targeted is one of the many things we have to do in the short term.
Well, it's supply and demand.
Yes.
And we have to do this holistically. And if we don't, we're not going to be successful.
That's right.
Let's talk a little bit about homelessness, because it's such an incredible crisis right now. It's not just Los Angeles and San Francisco, although when you're in Los Angeles or San Francisco, it's pretty obvious how bad it is and how bad it can be. But it's also at historic and horrifying levels in places like Phoenix, and cities like Boise are struggling with it too. I mean, this is not about a coastal problem anymore. And wow, talk about people throw around the term un-American in the campaign on both sides, but I can't think of anything more un-American than people living on the street when they don't have to. How is the department looking at this? You guys play a really significant role. What do you think we should be doing that we're not?
Yeah. Well, three thoughts. One, attacking homelessness is an all-of-government effort. HUD works very closely with our partners at Health and Human Services on the services side. We work with VA on homeless veterans. Certainly, many of your listeners may be familiar with the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. And so we work as a unit to try to do everything we can. But to your point, most of the dollars to help localities deal with homelessness do come from HUD. I had the honor the other day of being in LA and having an opportunity to talk with Mayor Bass there about some of the things that she has been doing to really move the needle, and some of the things that we've talked about that are been, limited people like her and others' ability to actually get people housed. And so the other day, there was a number of different mayors that met with me and said, hey, we've got to do something to help with this. I won't go into the weeds with your listeners. This particular thing in veterans homelessness is something that HUD controlled.
Which is an area where you've had a lot of success.
We have had a lot of success, but we were finding that there were some veterans who felt because of how much benefits they were receiving, they were actually being priced out of eligibility. So we talked to the lawyers. I have to gather the lawyers, and we fixed it. We just fixed
great.
it. We fixed it,
okay.
Right? We just fixed it. And so it was great to be out there in LA to see the fruits of that labor, to see some of the efforts and some of the veterans who were housed because we did one administrative thing that meant so much to so many people. In addition to that, we're really focused on trying to be tactical on where we need to stop homelessness before it begins. We have an effort to help our foster kids who are aging out of foster care and are being told to fly before they even have legs to walk. And so we've provided dedicated funding to local housing agencies, working with folks in their child welfare system to find and house and provide rental assistance for these young people who really need to have a place to live so they can adult in a healthy way. And so we've done that work as well. Look, this is something, the number one thing that we can do to help address homelessness is to prevent it from the start. And I know that's one place that me and my other sister agencies are looking at right now. How do we prevent it to begin with?
Well, and that's one of the things Jeff Olivet, and I'll put in a plug for him at USICH.
Yes,
He's done
Jeff
such
is
a great job.
Jeff is great.
And, he said, we're pretty good at getting people out of homelessness. Right. The problem is the pipeline going into it.
That's right.
And that ultimately comes right back to production of affordable housing.
That's right.
I mean, how do we deal with that
affordable,
better?
It's affordable housing It's wages. It's people finding the right job to afford where they can live. It's making sure that people are getting the health care they need so that they don't have medical debt that perhaps drives them out into, and have a sort of that economic stress. So there's a number of different things.
You have to say, without being partisan, this administration has leaned into affordable housing and housing affordability more than really anybody since the 1960s. And it started with President Biden's inaugural address. It wasn't even in the prepared text.
Right.
And he put housing in there. First time in my professional lifetime, it's been an inaugural address. That's a pretty darn good start.
It's a good start.
And a housing action plan to deal with supply. The vice president, easily the first time I've ever heard of, I'm sure it's the first time ever, that we had a 60-second spot in a political campaign about housing and a very meaty housing policy plan. We're not going to get into all the politics around that, but you read that and you can't deny, not to mention the fact that there's some overlap with some things that people like J.D. Vance have talked about and really foundational bipartisan bills in that.
What I'm encouraged by is that it's not even just happening at the national level. Right? You have governors, you have mayors, county executives, legislators who are singly now focused on ways that they can get more housing built for the people who need it the most. So here's what I'm encouraged by. That level of intentionality, that leadership, I think has put us in a position right now where over the past couple of years, we've seen just over 1 million new rental units come online. And where those units have come online, places like Austin, we're seeing rents cool. We see the direct impact of when you build housing, what happens with driving down or at least cooling housing costs. So we know that it works. And I think that the fact that we've had so many people, sadly, it's coming from a place of people who are heavily burdened by their housing costs. But we have so many leaders who are saying the time is now. We are seeing the net result of that.
Well, and, I always say more is always my number and we need more, but we've done a lot and there has been a flattening that I don't think really gets enough credit. But this is the problem with inflation. It's like to tell you that inflation has leveled off on food prices. Right. If you're still paying more for eggs, that's what you know. And this is the thing, regardless of who's president, if there's inflation on your watch, you get the blame and you get none of the credit.
That's right.
And that's true of everyone.
Well, here's the thing about that, right? I think that there was this little thing that was called the pandemic.
Yeah.
This little thing that really put people's lives and our economy on a roller coaster in so many different ways. So yes, groceries and rent are higher than they were in pre-pandemic. But then the pandemic happened and things began to change. We had supply chain issues, which have been addressed, and why our groceries bill is still high, I leave that for other people to determine. We had people on the coastal areas go into the middle of the country, places like Boise and, Charlotte and different points in Colorado, and began to drive the rental and homeownership market in a way that they had never seen locally. So I still insist, and history will show that while we are experiencing a housing crisis right now, and while we should have been building more units since 2012, 2013, to take care of the supply challenges we have now, I think the pandemic supercharged some of the crisis that we're going through at this very moment. And we are now working as fast as we can to make sure we're filling those gaps. But I do think with the 1 million new units that's come online, the fact that we have some of our home builders who may not be sitting on the sidelines as much as they were stepping back into getting things constructed will make a difference.
And we lost a lot of home builders.
Right.
And the economics of building homes really changed. And so we really have to do two things there. We have to encourage people to become home builders because we need to replace that capacity
and we need the labor.
We've lost.
Right.
And labor is a huge issue.
Labor. Right.
People don't talk about that when they talk about immigration.
Right.
But immigrants supply an enormous amount of construction jobs. And I talk to builders who are still walking around with bags of cash to their competitors' building sites and saying, hey, come work for me. There's just not enough people to do this work.
Well, we need the labor. There's lots of models I've received of really strong apprentice programs to create a pipeline of folks who might be unemployed or underemployed right now, where the construction trades may be a place for folks to really thrive, and just creating a pipeline and apprenticeship to get them to just fill that labor gap and also fill their pockets, because those are good paying jobs. Those trade jobs are good paying jobs. But, one of the things that we also see, David, is in addition to labor costs, material costs, the impact of the pandemic is the fact that it takes a long time to build housing. And it takes a long time to build housing in too many places. So we have a new program that's called Pro Housing. You may have heard of it. I'm very excited about this program. Yep. It is the first time, if not one of the first times, the federal government is trying to tip the scale so we can make sure that housing is being built more efficiently and with more urgency. And just the other day, it feels like just the other day, but it was probably 3 months ago, the vice president and I announced the first wave of funds, $85 million, that went to states and localities who were doing the right thing. Looking at some of the barriers to building smart and building quickly, looking at different ways to have housing plans. A lot of localities don't have the policy muscle to build a housing plan, like getting the data, seeing what the needs are, building to that need. And so providing them with funds to do that, and also providing some funds to help with discrete projects here and there. I think this program is a game changer. It's just getting sort of implemented, but I think it's a game changer. We have another $100 million that we hope to deploy. I'm going to say soon because I'm in charge. I'm sure other people here will say not so soon, but I'm going to say soon, another $100 million to help folks at the local level continue that work. So I'm thrilled about this program, because what we hear so frequently is, why is it so hard to build housing? And I agree, it is difficult to do, having done it. And I think this will be a way to incentivize folks to move faster.
Yeah. I mean, I remember 15 years ago in Detroit, the Garfield building, it was in Midtown, and Sue Mosey, I can't remember, 16 layers of financing or something. It was ridiculous. There were more layers of financing than were floors in the building. But when it got done, it said, this can be done. And then there was another building that didn't take as much. And then there was another building that actually came closer to being scalable. And now when you look at what's happening in Detroit, this is how these things start.
There's no magic wand. And let me tell you, affordable housing developers are magicians. I mean, they make it work, and they have the patience and the persistence year after year of having a big idea and muscling through. Community doesn't want it, and then you got to get the financing, and then it gets built and everybody's happy. All right. So I think that adrenaline of that ribbon cutting is what keeps so many of them going.
Definitely. And that's the ultimate tangibility, right? Reminds people, hey, this is what we did,
right?
Which for policymakers is often so frustrating that, what we did was a really good memo and or a white paper. Right. And it's like, yeah, nobody's living in that white paper.
Nobody ever does, right? But I take the time to talk to our development partners whenever and however I can, because I know they're the ones at the end of the day where the rubber hits the road. Like, somebody's got to take on that risk. Somebody's got to take on bringing all of those sources together. Somebody's got to bring the team together to make sure that things get built. Somebody has to negotiate with all the different levels of government, HUD included. So our affordable housing developers, many of whom who feel stressed right now for a number of different operational cost issues, are in many ways our heroes. So for all y'all listening, thank you for what you do.
Let's talk a little more about the pandemic policies. And one of the most successful, but also the most challenging, was that combination of rental assistance and the moratoriums. In that first year and a half before the vaccines, essential. I mean, to have homeless people as a result of completely no fault of their own, then being in a position where they could potentially spread the pandemic even more. Really a brilliant way of addressing this. And we paired that with assistance to help keep homeowners in their homes. We changed the way we did loss mitigation, both here and at FHFA. And then things started to get better, and the moratoriums were slow to end. Nobody wants to see people evicted. But at the same time, affordable housing developers started bleeding cash because people weren't paying their rent. And that, as you know, that can be contagious. People see somebody down the hall who's not paying their rent, and they're like, why am I paying my rent? Now, I was talking to the head of a major housing developer, affordable housing developer, and a nonprofit in California. She just wrote off $4 million in losses. I know you're hearing about this. How do we turn that corner now?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is a difficult one, David, because you're right. What I am hearing from those owners is too many of them are having to go into their reserves now to make ends meet, and it's just not sustainable. Some of them have provided us with some ideas of things to do, particularly the ones that we provide subsidy to, ways that we can help address some of their issues, at least in the short term. In many ways, it's a quiet sub-crisis that is happening as we're dealing with supply. Like, how do we preserve the affordable units that we already have? It's something that I've been talking to developers, Mary McFadden, who runs our community development shop, Julia Gordon, our commissioner. We are all hearing different ways that HUD can be helpful. But ultimately, I think that one of the things we need to address is the shared responsibility of affordable housing are the owners and the renters. And so we're going to have to figure that out. And that's a very delicate topic. I know that I just read that here in Washington, D.C., that there is some efforts underway to try to address some of those issues. And I know when I've traveled the country, there's a shared sentiment that something needs to change. And it's delicate, but I think we are going to have to address this. Otherwise, we will have more housing providers who are turning over the keys.
That's right.
And what that means is that we will lose those affordable units, and we can't go backwards that way.
When I talk to tenant advocates about this, and they're like, well, you don't want to put these people out on the street. And I'm like, yes, that's true. We don't want to see evictions. At the same time, we have people on the street who need those units. And the unit is not going to be empty. And so the question isn't, do we serve, but are we serving well and sustainably, and who we're serving?
In New York, I think that they're deploying, it might be HUD funds, I think just over $100 million to help with some of the rental arrears of folks there so we can prevent eviction. Look, this is very complex, extraordinarily complex, and something that ultimately will have to be resolved at the local level. And, HUD is here to do the things that we can, particularly for the sites that we subsidize, to make this a journey that is successful.
Yeah. So let's talk about an issue that I don't think we ever talk about enough, which is fair housing and fighting discrimination, which still exists. In some cases, it's very intentional, but in a lot of cases, it's an issue around disparate impact and the impact that, even when it's not intentional, is still having that effect. And what I say to people is, if I have a 3-year-old and they knock over a cherished family heirloom and it breaks into 1 million pieces on the ground, the first thing they'll say is, I didn't mean it. And they didn't mean it. But if it happens again, and I knew it happened once, I do have a certain responsibility to move the darn things out of reach.
Right.
And that's how I think about disparate impact is, the first time I'm willing to give you a pass. But if we're just going to sit and watch it happen, that's just not okay. Tell me a little bit about that and how the department is fighting for fair housing and against discrimination in housing.
Well, fair housing is at the core of HUD's mission. And it's something that our team here does well every single day, both to prevent it, but also to address it when it happens. And, we provide funding to a number of cities and nonprofits to be the front line for when those complaints come in and to do the kind of training so folks know what to recognize when they're actually experiencing a fair housing moment, or a lack of fair housing, rather. So we provide the funding, we provide education, we provide technical assistance, but then we bring the big guns, right? When people do the wrong thing, between my team here in the Fair Housing Equal Opportunity Office and Department of Justice, we go after those bad actors. We go after those bad actors who are absolutely doing the wrong thing, blatantly doing the wrong thing with no regard for the law, given the example that you shared. And, I think it was just yesterday, HUD and DOJ, but working with HUD, have filed charges against some companies who are very blatantly exercising appraisal bias.
Yeah, and appraisal bias is a really big issue.
And it's a big issue, right? So we look at fair housing in many different ways. We look at it from the perspective of, don't do it, here's what it looks like. Make sure that people are following the rules and you are providing fair housing to folks in all of the different classes. We're then providing the opportunity for people who are being discriminated against because of their race and their gender and their familial status, an opportunity to file those complaints and seek justice. And then we partner with our colleagues at DOJ, attorney generals across the country, on bringing those claims. So let me tell you about the appraisal bias. I have to assume your listeners have been following this, but
some of them have, but let's set some context because there are people who have had appraisers come to their house and give them an appraisal. And then they realize that they might have been discriminated against. So they're generally Black. And their home might look like a Black person lives there.
Right.
And so they actually have a white friend come in. Yes. They take down any kind of art or any indication,
books,
family pictures that might indicate that they're Black. They have a white friend sit there when the appraiser comes in and they get an appraisal that can be hundreds of thousands of dollars more. And they call that whitewashing your house. And wow, I mean, that is just mind-blowing. And that, in America in the 21st century, no one should have to whitewash their house. Right. That's just so outrageous.
And for too many Black and brown families, that's just become the norm, right? It's what you do, right? It's what you do. It's not going to change. It's what you do. And one of the things that this president did was create a task force that included HUD and Domestic Policy Council to say, we actually can do something about this. It's wrong, and we got to do something about this. And we have been. The work isn't done, but one of the things that I'm proud of is we're providing more awareness to folks that it is wrong and that there's ways for you to pursue justice. We are saying to our lending friends across the country that they need to provide a process, the services need to provide a process by which if someone feels that their appraisal was lowballed, there is an opportunity for there to be another valuation. And so we're doing that as well. In addition to that, we are actually settled with the Appraisal Foundation on a groundbreaking settlement that allows for more people, more diversity rather, in that industry that does not look like the country.
It definitely doesn't. And the barriers to entry are a big part of that.
That is correct. And so there's a new apprenticeship program that the foundation will be paying for to make sure that there's more diverse appraisal industry in this country. And also just some things that we're working with them and many other members of the federal family. I'm so encouraged by the work that FHFA has done and Sandra's done on getting data out there to show.
Sandra Thompson, the director of FHFA.
That's right.
Really is an incredibly powerful agency.
Absolutely.
In terms of the conventional conforming market outside of FHA.
Absolutely. So the work that they have done to just get access to data to begin to measure the problem and see how we move forward. Really excited about the work that they have done. And, there's going to be some big news from HUD over the next couple of weeks. But it's been an all-of-government effort with the leadership of this president and vice president shining a light on this. And many people are shocked that we've even been able to get this far in terms of the work that needs to be done. And there's more work to do. We continue to look at our friends at CFPB and others who are excited about this body of work and more to come. One of the things that I've been doing here over the past couple weeks is doing one of the things that's really HUD's superpower, bringing together and being a convener of folks on a number of different challenges to us right now. We know housing supply. Bringing together people to talk about the increase in insurance costs, bringing people to talk about what do we do with having enough liquidity if there's another sort of financial shock in our non-banker servicers, right? Bringing in academics to talk about what are their big ideas. You know, as practitioners, we think we know it all, but academics really do dream even more than we do.
Yes.
Bringing them in to talk about what they think.
That's how stuff gets done.
That's how it gets done.
And I really appreciated that.
Yeah, that's how stuff gets done. And, you know, there's other things we need to do about the development process. I mean, all the things that we just talked about. There are brilliant people around the country who are thinking about this and doing it every single day. And part of HUD's job, part of our job, is to be inclusive in the way that we're bringing these ideas together so we can find solutions that work for everybody. Not every place is New York. Not every place is Salina, Kansas. Not every place is Miami. Not every place is Selma. We have to have solutions for all those places. And when we bring together some of the country's top leaders and our local leaders, we can get that done.
Well, I don't know that there's anybody who's ever been as qualified and who has got as much done in the time that you've been given. And I really appreciate that.
You're kind to say so. I can't speak to politics at all, but I love leading this agency. It is one that I think is the most consequential department, given what Americans need. And I'm just happy to do the job right now.
And you're doing it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Beyond Four Walls. You can visit the National Housing Conference at nhc.org. There you can learn more about affordable housing policies, affordability challenges throughout the nation on our Paycheck to Paycheck database, and explore membership in NHC for you or your organization. We appreciate your interest and look forward to working with you in the future. Until next time, I'm David Dworkin, NHC's President and CEO, wishing you a great day.